Keep Putin. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
We came, we saw, he died.
We both agree that Assad needs to go.
You know, fuck the EU.
And we are live today. We have a great guest. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I don't know. I'm trying something different today, so I'm still getting used to this system with StreamYard. So if the image disappear by chance, it's some glitches in the computer. I tested early and something happened like this. So today we have a fantastic guest, Mr. Robert Fantina, who is an activist, journalist, working for peace and social justice. He serves in the boards of Canadian Voices for Palestinian Rights and Canadian for Justice in Kashmir. He wrote several books, including one of the latest ones, which is called Propaganda, Lies, and False Flag: How the U.S. Justifies its Wars. This called my attention for this book. It's a very interesting topic for the channel, and as I was telling him just before we come live, it's a topic that by chance is going to be repeated for the entire week here in the channel. So we had some very interesting together talk in the Iranian TV a couple of weeks ago, and it was just fantastic, that talk, because I don't know if it was on purpose by the Iranian guys or by chance, and I love by chance. I was just telling him how I love by chance. This week is going to be all about that by chance. I did not plan that. But our interaction there was almost like you were explaining something and exposing something, and then they were calling me to say something that I could just agree with you and follow on, and then you were following on. It was very flowing. So, Robert, how are you doing, sir? Welcome to the channel for the first time. Unfortunately, you couldn't make the last live stream, the One World live stream, because of my fault. I sent the link to the wrong place. How are you doing? Welcome to the channel. Please introduce yourself a little bit and tell the people on the audience what they can expect to hear from us today a little bit.
Okay, I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for your warm welcome. I'm happy to be here and have this discussion. As you mentioned, one of the books I wrote is called Propaganda, Lies, and False Flags: How the U.S. Justifies Its Wars. That was a follow-up to my book, Empire, Racism, and Genocide: A History of U.S. Foreign Policy. So you have a good idea of my view of U.S. foreign policy based on those two book titles. I've also written extensively about the oppression of Palestine by the Israeli government, and also about the oppression of the Kashmiris by the Indian government. So I'm very interested in international law and human rights, and I am a major advocate for marginalized people everywhere. Right now, of course, my focus is on Palestinians because of the genocide that they're experiencing right now. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, that's awesome. So the idea I had, and I explained more or less to you, is to pick up. So what I do here in the channel is bring everything that happens around the world and try to build parallels to Brazilian people, so we can understand. It's very hard for us to understand what happens around the globe and what that influence directly in what happens in Brazil. I mean, it's difficult for everybody, but we in Brazil, we got used to this, dichotomy between left and right. So we have Lula against Bolsonaro, or Lula against whoever, or Bolsonaro against whoever. And we just don't understand that it's all connected, and it really doesn't matter because the bosses are above the pay grade of the president of Brazil. But this is probably not going to be the focus point today. I would like to understand how does as we mentioned, the book name is Propaganda, Lies, and I forgot the last one.
False flags.
The false flags, exactly.
How the U.S. justifies its wars.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The propaganda is very important because it's built over time. We do not notice. It's not obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So how is the United States mainly, and of course the NATO countries and all the media around the planet, how does this work with the propaganda? How do they build the narrative? How do they push the narrative until people actually believe the narrative and agree with the countermeasures against the narrative?
We have to look at the basis and the foundation. There are people in power who want to stay in power. They'll do anything to stay in power, and they are making a lot of money by their powerful positions. So because of that, they will start this propaganda and focus propaganda on something that they think will be popular. So, for example, you mentioned the United States and NATO countries and so on. They present themselves as fostering human rights, international law, self-determination. These are lies. The United States, especially, which calls itself a beacon of freedom and justice in the world, ignoring the poverty in the United States, the crime, the disease, the difficulty that people who aren't wealthy have living in the United States, and ignoring the fact that throughout its history, the United States has destabilized, sometimes through internal supporting internal dissent in the country that they're targeting, and sometimes simply bombing it, doing it the easy way. If a country if it elects a government that's too far to the left, that wants to have any relations with Russia or with Cuba, so the United States says these are there's something wrong with these countries. The people are being oppressed, and it's not what the people want, it's what the government wants. This is just a lie. People in various countries where international observers have said this was a fair election, the United States has come in and said, oh, this is crooked, we have to help the people to get the leadership they want. And in many cases, the United States then installs a brutal dictatorship. One example that was in 1953, when the United States, through the Central Intelligence Agency, overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran and installed the Shah of Iran. So for the next almost 30 years, the people of Iran lived under a brutal dictatorship. They had elected a government in free and fair elections. The United States overthrew that government and installed a dictator, a brutal dictator, who the people finally rose up and overthrew. And since that time, since the Iranian Revolution, the United States has demonized Iran and is forever wanting so-called regime change in that country. So that's kind of a long answer to your question.
It's a quick answer to the question. Actually, we can see that going on right now in Venezuela. And it's not even new. I mean, it's been there for 20 years perhaps, since Chavez was there, and then Maduro, and we see several assassination attempts. We see several invasion attempts of Venezuela, and now just recently we had an election, and let's assume it was corrupt. It's all right. It's the country. So all the legal mechanisms of the country assume that it was legal. And then we see our president in Brazil saying, well, yeah, I don't know, I have to look at the whatever it's called, the papers that prove that dude,
Mm-hmm.
you're nobody to ask that. You're the president of Brazil. That's another country. And
Right.
the same we see in the United States, of course.
It's the same. The United States has They seized Maduro's jet somewhere. They're saying it's a crooked election. The people of Venezuela need to deal with their issues. If the election was crooked, then there are laws in place in Venezuela that they can utilize to correct that. If it was a free and fair election, same thing. They need to be. People of any one country aren't looking for outside interference. Now, some of the prominent members of their society, some of the rich, wealthy people, may seek the United States so-called intervention. But basically, when that happens, the United States should say no. The United States never will. But a country's domestic problems are the problems of that country. Now, in rare cases where maybe there's slaughter of innocents happening, then maybe the international community, not the United States, the international community may take some action in the form of sanctions or whatever it might be. But for the United States to determine that election was not legitimate, that elected leader is not legitimate, and then take action, whether it's supporting anti-government forces within the country or bombing the country, sanctioning it in whatever way, that is not the domain of the United States or the Brazilian government or any other government. If this is what's happening in Venezuela, the Venezuelan people have the responsibility and the ability to deal with it.
Yeah, that's the main focus, I guess, on this conversation to so people can understand that. Yeah, so first of all, a country has what some call sovereignty, and that means that its own problems, it's nobody else's problems. But the propaganda part is still very, I've been calling it technology. People don't understand when I use the term technology, because usually when you think about technology, you think about smartphones or electric cars or, I don't know, satellites. But on the world of technology, on the world of technology, since like fires was technology at some point, was advanced. Cooking was advanced. All this was advanced technology to a certain point, and now we have this what we don't understand properly, which is social media and YouTubes and Twitters and all that, and Meta. So how does the United States are able to build all this propaganda machine to convince Brazilian people that have nothing to do with Russia, that Russia is the bad guy, or Saddam was the bad guy. Okay, Saddam was kind of easy, but people like Assad, when at some point about 2000, I don't know, 2015, 2016, I say, okay, Bashar al-Assad. And in my mind was always someone, with this white dress and the turban, big bear, like this typical Arabic figure that it's built on our minds. When I look at the picture of the guy, I say, dude, the guy's a dentist or something like that, or an oculist or something.
It wears a suit like a Westerner wears, that sort of thing. He does not wear the traditional clothing, but he has been demonized. Now, a few years ago, when Trump was president, Assad was accused of using chemical weapons against his own people. So the US government bombed part of Syria. And then within a matter of hours, they said, well, we had no evidence that Assad did use chemical weapons, but we thought he probably did. Now, this, again, the propaganda was that, oh, he's a brutal dictator, and they've been fostering that for years. And now he's crossed a red line. He's used chemical weapons against his own people. So without any evidence of that, the people believed that here was this madman in Syria that the United States has said for so many years that he's repressing dissent in his country. The dissent in his country is being financed and fostered by the United States. ISIS was, and probably still is, financed by the U.S. While the U.S. say, oh, we're fighting the ISIS terrorists, and they're also supplying money, weaponry to them. So they're seeing this enables the government, the U.S. government, to portray al-Assad or anybody else as evil. And you talk about social media, when Meta and other social media companies work with the government to remove certain posts, certain anti-posts that criticize Israel or that criticize Ukraine for something it might be doing, or that attempt to show that the Russian invasion of Ukraine, while it was wrong, any invasion of any country is wrong, but it isn't quite as simple as the U.S. government would like to say. It wasn't simply evil Russia wanted to overtake Ukraine. There was the overthrow of the Ukrainian government with assistance of the United States, and it was a government friendly to Russia, and the new government is more friendly to the United States. So there's a lot of nuances there that is filtered out of much of social media. So that's where we see the propaganda, and as you call it, the technology of propaganda being impacted by, again, a powerful country, the United States, working with powerful corporations who want the benefits of the tax benefits and so on that the U.S. government gives them, and so they'll play along with the U.S. game.
You probably haven't seen the introduction of the channel. I like to use this not so subtle actually, images and videos. So in the typical the introduction of the channel, I have some others, but the typical introduction of the channel is basically Trump saying that that speech where Trump was saying that Venezuela was on United States hands. You could just basically go there and grab it. Then you have Obama saying Assad must go. Hillary Clinton saying that for Muammar Gaddafi, we came, we saw, he's dead. The classical one, and also of course Biden saying Putin must go. And so all this, when you look at this perspective on a 35-second vignette, it's very clear that there's something there. The today thumbnail for the video, you mentioned the chemical attack in Syria. I put the image. I tried to find the best I could, the image of the CNN reporter, that woman sniffing, smelling the backpack, and saying, there were some chemical weapons in here. I can smell chemical weapons.
Right. It's just she and most news agencies are simply spokes organizations for U.S. government propaganda. And you mentioned Hillary Clinton. We saw he's dead. When at one point she said that the best thing the United States could do for Israel was to destabilize Syria. In another case, she said that if Iran were to attack Israel, the U.S. would obliterate Iran. Nothing about diplomacy, nothing about the innocent victims in any country, just this kind of lockstep. We're gonna obliterate this country. We're going to destabilize that country. These kinds of things sell because Hillary Clinton was made to seem like, oh, she's a leader. She's breaking the glass ceiling. She's senator, secretary of state. She was at the time a candidate for president. What a wonderful person, et cetera, et cetera. And that when she makes these horrific statements, people have been trained through the propaganda to think, oh, she knows what she's talking about. She's an intelligent individual. She's a government official who's just really knows what it's all about. So it's, as you mentioned earlier, it's kind of a slow process, but it's been ongoing for decades, and it's entrenched at this point. So when the United States calls itself a beacon of freedom and liberty, that is believed within U.S. borders, not entirely, but to a large extent. But talk to people in Libya, throughout the Middle East, throughout Central American countries, throughout African countries, throughout Asian countries, who've been the victims of U.S. bombs and oppression and overthrows over the years. They don't see the U.S. as a beacon of freedom and liberty. They see it as what it is, an imperial colonial nation that they need to be afraid of.
Yeah, unfortunately, in Brazil, most of people don't see that yet. That's why I'm trying to do this work.
Yeah.
It's as I always mention, Brazil is under the propaganda umbrella of the United States. Very little we can do about, the when I moved to Europe. So I'm in Italy. When I moved to Europe, I could see that, even though Europe is pretty much under the United States protectorate umbrella, the cable TV, all that, nothing is American. Basically, nothing is American. Everything it's European, it's French, it's national, kind of national, and it's even not very welcome the American culture in the North American culture in Europe. It's seen something like, yeah, we have our own. It's all right.
Right. Yeah, you leave us alone.
Leave us alone. Nonetheless, yes, people are still buy a lot of the BS that is sold. The Ukraine situation was pretty clear here for me to see how people got, very divided in the mind, and it's simply destroying the countries. It's amazing how people do not wake up to that.
And another point in U.S. propaganda, and again, U.S. propaganda is what I've specialized in, but the movies and television programs and so on show a rich society, society with fancy cars and big houses. It doesn't show the people who are homeless. It doesn't show the people who are living in their cars while they're working full time, or the people who are barely scraping by, which is a huge, huge number in the United States. So some people see it and say, yeah, I want what the United States has, but they don't see what the United States has. They see the artificial picture that the United States is presenting, and that's what propaganda is all about.
This brought me to a question that came to my mind when I was reading your biography on your website, which, by the way, all the links to Robert Fantina are on the description to whoever wants to read his work. I didn't have time today, but I'll put later the links for Amazon, for your books and everything, so if people want to buy, know where to buy. One thing that called my attention, I got curious, and it's a personal deal, so you feel free to just say, yeah, I don't care about that. In your biography, it says that you moved away. You're a U.S. citizen, if I understood correctly, and you moved away from the United States in 2004 to Canada, where you live now. You put
yes,
and also have it's a Canadian citizen. What were the causes for that? If it's anything related to what we're talking about, of course.
Well, it is certainly related, and I moved from the United States to Canada. Canada is not utopian, but I felt it was better than the United States, and I didn't have to learn new language, so that helped too. But in 2002, as you recall, the election was between Al Gore and George Bush, and George Bush was appointed actually by the Supreme Court when there was a dispute. So 4 years later, in 2004, he was elected. He did win the popular vote, which he didn't win in 2000. At that point, the Iraq War was going on. I didn't want my tax dollars going to kill innocent Iraqis. I had a son who was a teenager at the time, and I was afraid that the draft was going to be reinstated in the United States, and I didn't want him to be involved in that. So for those reasons, my wife, my son, and I moved to Canada, where we've all lived ever since. So the reasons were definitely political. I had a employment in the States that I was fine with, and I did have employment opportunities based on my background, but I couldn't continue to pay the taxes that were going to kill Iraqis and to risk my son, who's of course now an adult, being forced to go into the U.S. military for a completely unjustified war. And I want to mention that I believe all wars are unjustified, but this one was certainly, people might be able to argue about others, but this one was completely unjustified. And talking about propaganda, we can get into weapons of mass destruction. But that was why I moved to Canada in 2005.
Which is also on the thumbnail, Colin Powell shaking the whatever chemical weapon in the
Right.
Security Council. Again, the propaganda.
Absolutely.
The guy that brought some chemical or biological weapon to Security Council should leave there directly to jail. Let's put it like that.
Right. Yeah, and who knows what he had in that test tube anyway? Because we know that
bread.
Yeah, we know that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. They were never found. The Iraqi government said from the start, "We don't have them. Come and look." And the UN had its inspectors going anywhere they wanted. Iraq had opened unprecedented opening to any sites that the inspectors wanted to see, and they were finding nothing. And then George Bush told the UN, "Remove your inspectors because we're going to bomb." So there was no reason. This was an issue, not a problem, but an issue that could have been resolved through diplomacy, through the United Nations doing the inspections, which is what was happening. But the United States said, "No, we're going to do it our way," and our way is almost always bombs.
Yeah, I think we entered the false flag territory now, and
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
it's exactly the point. I mean, they send the inspectors. The inspectors could guarantee there is no chemical weapons or biological weapons or weapons of mass destruction. That's why United States came in, because if there was some, they couldn't afford to go in.
Right.
A country that can protect itself, it cannot be invaded. Sorry.
And that's why, but that's exactly right. And if, for example, the U.S. is doing everything it can to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, and for the past 20 years, Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying that Iran is days away from a nuclear weapon. Well, it's taken them 20 years. Because the U.S. knows that if Iran is a nuclear armed state, then it can't protect itself. It can protect itself now, but it would be extremely difficult and probably not successful against the United States. But any country that's vulnerable, the United States will invade if it does something the United States doesn't like. But again, you said we kind of moved into false flags, so I'd like to bring up a very striking one. There are many. There was the Gulf of Tonkin non-issue at the start of the Vietnam War, the weapons of mass destruction we talked about. But the Gulf War, people sometimes forget, there was what was known as the Naraya testimony. Now, this was a young woman who said she was a volunteer at a hospital in Kuwait, and she saw Iraqi soldiers come in and take babies out of incubators and put them on the ground, and they took the incubators for whatever reasons. Babies died and all this. And George Bush used that. That was quoted by members of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate as showing the evil of the Iraqi regime. But it turned out, and it was known just within days, that this young woman was not a volunteer at the hospital. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. And a public relations firm in the United States had arranged this whole thing, had given her the script, had called the news conference from start to finish. It was all lies. It was a false flag. People in the U.S. were horrified that soldiers would take these babies out of incubators and just leave them to die. Well, it didn't happen.
This is extremely interesting because right now we are seeing something else developing in Gaza, and there's always some babies involved, and there's always some, violations of women's involved, and it just seems, at this point I should ask: is the Hollywood script writers still on strike on the United States? Because they just seem to be reusing everything.
Yeah, the U.S. government knows, the propaganda experts know that when you talk about babies and children being vulnerable, that resonates with people. So when the October 7th resistance first happened, Biden or his spokespeople said, oh, they're beheading babies. And within a couple of hours, his spokespeople said, well, we don't know that. Netanyahu told us that was happening. And since then, there's been no evidence that that ever happened. And we also know the initial reports that Hamas had killed about 1,200 people. We know now that at least a few hundred of those were killed by Israeli soldiers who were kind of panicking and didn't know what to do. They're shooting everyone in sight. In December, they shot 3 surrendering hostages. They were Israelis who were surrendering and or coming out, and the IDF
with the white flag and speaking
white flag.
in Hebrew.
Right, and they were shot and killed. So we know that the IDF soldiers, for the most part, have no regard for human life, Israeli or anyone else. Now, a few soldiers have come out and said they've seen what's happening in Gaza. They're not going back, and they're speaking out. But because the propaganda machine is running full steam, they aren't getting much publicity. But that is happening.
Yeah, one thing that today is almost impossible with Telegram in our hands is to tell a story, tell a tale. And what I've said a couple of times here, when I hear Blinken, for example, speaking in whatever place he does, he just sounds like that old lady that tells story to children in the corner of the bookstore. He speaks. He was the other day he was telling this. Putin has lost, and he was like, Putin has already lost all his plans. With this cozy voice and all that. And I was like, dude, you have a job there. There's a good job for you. Telling children stories in the bookstores. But nowadays it's almost impossible because I opened a Telegram, which I even closed a little bit recently because the images from Gaza. I'm all right seeing soldiers dying, being blown up. I'm all right with that. Personally, I mean, with my feelings. But children, it's a bit too much. And I don't have money right now for therapy.
I understand. I look at those pictures because I need to know, and I need to stay angry. I need to by staying informed or staying angry. Someone said, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. So that's what I look at. But you mentioned Blinken and saying, we've talked a little about propaganda, a little about false flags. Let's get to lies when he's saying that Putin has lost everything and so on. And he keeps saying that the United States is working tirelessly for a ceasefire in Gaza. The United States is financing the whole thing, is sending the weapons that are killing the Palestinians in Gaza. So the United States could have prevented this genocide or stopped it any time in the last 11 months and chose not to. Now, the next lie we're going to hear is that, so I'm predicting the future here, but it's not difficult to do, is that the U.S. spokespeople are going to say an agreement, a ceasefire agreement is on the table, Israel has agreed to it, and Hamas just won't agree to it. Well, that could happen because a new ceasefire agreement will give Israel everything it wants and give nothing to Palestine. Now, the agreement that the United Nations approved back in July was agreed to by Hamas leaders and Israeli leaders. And as soon as Hamas leaders agreed to it, the Israeli leaders said, no, we want some more conditions. So it isn't the Palestinian side that is resisting a ceasefire, it's the Israeli side. But this is a lie that U.S. spokespeople continue to say. And as I think you mentioned earlier, when a lie is told often enough, people begin to believe it. And especially since the propaganda that has demonized Hamas for the last 27 years is so pervasive. And people don't recognize that Hamas was elected legitimately, and that Hamas, before it had to really start resisting the brutal occupation, the occupation was going on brutally for years, but initially it was helping people with building schools and hospitals and doing things that the government in the West Bank Fatah was not doing. But that's part of the propaganda, is to ignore all that and just talk about, oh, it's a terrorist organization. The U.S. has determined it's a terrorist organization, therefore it's a terrorist organization. Doesn't make sense.
This is very important because it's important and interesting. I apologize, people, because my face here, since I have the yellow light and I have to use the yellow filter, my face is dissolving on the light. But next time is going to be better. I promise. At least Robert his image is all good. That's the important part. It's extremely interesting that, once the United States say, well, yeah, Hamas is a terrorist group, suddenly the word said Hamas is a terrorist group. No. It's the United States. Some European countries, not even all of them, some European countries may say that, but it's the United States. And well, yeah, let's put entire NATO. All right, they are an alliance. They will sign papers together, whatever they say. But it's just them. Brazil, for example, when as I say, drawing these parallels with Brazil, Brazilian people say, yeah, the President Lula some months ago said, called Israel for its first name and said things about Hamas, supporting Hamas. And people are like, oh, he supports terrorists. No, he doesn't. Brazil does not recognize Hamas as terrorists. No organization in Brazil recognizes Hamas as terrorists. We have a very plural culture in Brazil. And we have, Arab diaspora. We have a Muslim diaspora. And most of these people are going to say, yeah, pretty much that's not a terrorist state or a terrorist organization, whatever. And at the same time, as you mentioned pretty well, ISIS, that's basically created out of nowhere, out of the blue. I remember, I'm 43, so I kind of remember pretty well the 2000s. And out of the blue, some organizations were being born. Al-Qaeda, and then ISIS, and then Al-Shabaab, and whatever, name it. All these organizations were being born out of the blue. I was not understanding. Where did these guys come? And then if you look at Wikipedia now, it says that it comes since 1970. No, it wasn't there before 2000s. And they were just rebranding and, mixing.
Follow the money. Follow where are they getting their financing, and that's when when they started. And there might have been some ragtag groups together trying to organize something, but when did they start getting money and where that money comes from? And in so many cases, the source of that money is the United States. And we talked about Libya briefly back in 2011, after the UN approved Security Council for humanitarian aid. Within days, Barack Obama, who was president at the time, approved funding for Libyan rebels. So it's all the web of terrorism starts and ends with the United States.
Yeah, they are called what they are called. They are called moderate rebels. And then 2 years later, they are terrorists.
And that's a very good point, vocabulary and what we call people. When during the Iraq War, the U.S. referred to insurgents, people who were opposing U.S. occupation. Insurgents. They were freedom fighters. A foreign nation had invaded them, and they were fighting against that foreign nation and those foreign fighters. Those aren't insurgents. Those are freedom fighters. Those are people who are fighting for their country against a foreign invader. But the language is made such, insurgents, they're insurgents, the insurgency. This all sounds so negative and so terrible, so these must be terrible people. But you have to reframe it to, they're freedom fighters. Same way with Hamas, they're not terrorists. They are elected government body, which has a military wing, and any country has a right to defend itself. And an occupied country, under international law, has the right to resist the occupation in any way possible, including armed struggle. So that's what we're seeing. That's what we've been seeing. And it's not a matter of Israel defending itself. If someone's walking down the street and they get assaulted and the assailant is punching them, and then the victim fights back, well, then the assailant isn't defending themselves against the victim. They're aggressing the victim even more. And this unfortunately gets lost, but it's vocabulary, it's propaganda, and it's lies.
Yeah, I had a hard time. I picked up the UN chart where it decided the division between Israel and Palestine. I had a hard time to find exactly because it's drawn not very well, not Google Maps. It's just a drawn paper. I had a hard time, but I'm pretty sure that the place where Hamas stroke on the October 7th, it's Palestine on the UN Charter. Although,
yes.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Please.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, there's so many. Israel was given unfairly, I believe, in 1947, 1948, over half of Palestine. But if we assume for a moment that's done, that's international decision, Israel exists, but those are its borders. But since then, illegal settlements in the West Bank, the expansion of Israel into Gaza, this is all in violation of international law. Now, the Israeli government disputes it. It says that they need this for their security, but no one ever talks about Palestinian security. And again, as you pointed out, the United Nations set the borders. So those are what the borders should be. And the Israeli government has never respected those borders, and the United States government has never respected those borders.
Yeah, one thing that I have an analyst that we have a weekly show here in the channel. It's called Lucas Leroy. One thing that we always talk about is that man-made borders can be changed. So basically, we are. When I mentioned that, I think it's important because we're talking about international law, which is also a very complicated concept. International law. Okay, so if the United States say that you have to do that, and then you have to do it, no, perhaps not. That goes against the principle of sovereignty. But let's assume international law decided that these are the borders, these are drawn. You can dispute later, but these are drawn. They have to be respected. And if you do not respect it militarily, and I'm talking about Israel, if you do not respect it militarily, then the other side has the right to impose its borders as they are defined, also militarily. And it's not so hard to understand. What is hard to understand is why Palestine is not recognized.
Yes. Now, Palestine is recognized by something like 130 countries in the United Nations, but they don't stand with Palestine to the degree that the United States stands with Israel. They don't provide it with the same diplomatic cover in the United Nations. Not that it needs it, but it doesn't provide. The Palestinians get so little aid, and the blockade of the Gaza Strip that's been going on for decades, and the oppression of the Palestinian people that's been going on since 1948 is not addressed. Constant violation of international law, as you said. So let's accept for the moment the borders as established in 1947, 1948. Then anything that compromises those borders is a violation of international law and needs to be addressed by the international community.
Yeah, it's not that hard, and I think it is addressed. When this October 7th happened, a friend of mine sent in the group, in the WhatsApp group, a video. Oh, check this video, because there's a lot of videos to be checked in the internet, including this one. So people, remember to like, share, subscribe to your friends, and those in Brazil who wants to support the channel. My hand is dissolving in the image, but you have the the QR code where you can send some donations. this friend sent a video, which is basically this is in YouTube. If I can find it, probably I won't find it now after several months, but I could send you just to point out
Mhm.
to see it, which is basically a video where a woman saying why the UN is against Israel, and basically it says all the propagandas and oh yeah, every year there are that many resolutions against Israel. Yeah,
Mhm.
because it's the same, and you keep not
Mhm.
respecting them. That's not so hard. So every year we have to, same way as the Cuban
Right.
resolution.
Yeah. If a person keeps getting arrested for different crimes, it doesn't mean the authorities are out to get that person. It means that person is committing crimes. So it's the same thing with, it's a parallel. So there are countless resolutions condemning and criticizing Israel for its violation of international law. That's because it's forever violating international law. It's not, the United States is not biased against Israel. It's not out to get Israel. It is recognizing Israeli crimes against usually the Palestinians, but sometimes other of its neighbors too.
Yeah, Robert, we've been here for 45 minutes. We kind of arranged. There are so many that I want to discuss with you, but especially about the Kashmir place. But this is probably going to have a special 40 minutes just for that because I have no idea what's happening there. I have a Pakistani neighbor, very nice person, very knowledgeable. He tried to explain me at once, and I got completely okay. I don't get it.
Well, I'm happy to talk about Kashmir also and what's happening there because it does parallel what's happening in Palestine. So just very briefly, Kashmir was granted a limited autonomy uh, when the Kashmir or India and Pakistan and following World War II. And then uh, the Kashmiri people were guaranteed that a plebiscite would be held where they could decide whether they wanted to be part of India or part of Pakistan. This was in 1948. So since then, the Indian government has never allowed that to happen. Now, in August of 2019, the Indian government abrogated the part of their constitution that gave that limited autonomy to Kashmir. Now, during that time of limited autonomy, the Kashmiri people were horribly repressed, but there were certain things. Indians couldn't purchase land in Kashmir. Now they can. Since that time, all of the government offices, which were previously administered by Kashmiris, are now administered by Indians, and Indians are purchasing property. So what may happen is that in a few years, when the Indian population exceeds the Kashmiri population, India may then decide to allow this plebiscite to happen. Well, at that point, the demographics of Kashmir have so changed so much. There'll be an Indian majority, and they'll vote to go with India. Now, Pakistan, since the abrogation, has said that if a plebiscite is handled or is held, and Kashmir votes to become part of Pakistan, and if Kashmir wants to become an independent nation again, Pakistan would grant it its independence. But the oppression, and my most recent book is called Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir, and it shows the parallels between the two and the oppression. There are chapters on torture, indefinite detention, sexual violence, violation of international law that India and Israel are committing on a daily basis in Kashmir and Palestine. And you're right, I'd love to come back and do a full hour on Kashmir sometime in the future. But when Donald Trump was president, he said he agreed with Modi, the Prime Minister of India, that Kashmir is an internal problem. He said Modi's got it under control. The repression, he does have it under control because the people are so repressed. After October 7th, they were not allowed to demonstrate in support of the Palestinian people. The number of arrests, indefinite detentions is just, it parallels what's happening in Palestine. But this is part of propaganda. A U.S. propaganda and lies. A U.S. president says, well, it's an internal Indian problem. None of the international community has to deal with it. That's a total lie. but it's propaganda because it's coming from a U.S. president.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's my 2-minute tutorial on Kashmir.
2-minute tutorial on Kashmir. I'm gonna need much more to understand since the beginning why it happens, but it's okay.
I'll be happy to discuss it another time.
In another opportunity.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you very much for the participation today. Hope to see you again in the channel. We can keep in touch, of course, and perhaps jump together in another Iranian TV
yes.
conversation. Was a very interesting. Not always the partners that happen to be there at the same time. We have such a good connectivity in the talkings. So remember, everybody, that all the links to Robert Fantina. You want to do some last assessments or say goodbye to him?
Just my books are available on at any book dealer, and you can find them just by my last name. But the one we're talking about today, of course, is Propaganda, Lies, and False Flags: How the U.S. Justifies its Wars. My most recent one, which is quite timely now, is Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. There's another one which is called Occupied Palestine, Israel, U.S. International Law, which people may also find interesting, especially at this time. And I thank you for this opportunity. I've enjoyed our conversation very much and look forward to having another one.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And everybody, remember to like, share, subscribe. Like and share everything that Robert posts on Twitter and on his site, and buy his books. It's good literature. See you guys next time. See you, Robert. Bye.
Thank you.